Hello and welcome. My name is Sharon Hutton, and I am one of the chapter leaders of Parents for Children's Mental Health. Today, we are presenting a joint initiative between the Waterloo School Board and Parents for Children's Mental Health to bring you some content on supporting your anxious child. Any links that we refer to in this presentation will be available wherever you access this webinar. I'm now going to introduce you to my chapter partner, Angela Sider.
Hi there, my name's Angela Sider, and I am, like Sharon said, one of the co-chapter leaders for Parents for Children's Mental Health for the Waterloo region. And I am also a parent of two children who both struggle with some mental health. And I'll pass it over to Katie.
Hello, my name is Katie McFan, and I am a psychological services consultant with the Waterloo Region District School Board. And I'm here today with three of my colleagues, and we are going to present a webinar on supporting your anxious child. And we're excited to be here today. So as I mentioned, I'm a consultant with the school board, and I've been working for the school board for about 9 years. I support mainly elementary schools in Kitchener area, as well as the Ortho and Vision program.
My name is Lisa Bechtel, and I've been with the school board about 10 years. I am assigned to elementary schools as well as secondary schools in the Kitchener-Waterloo area, and I also service schools in the country areas, and I also support the threat risk assessment team.
Hi, I'm Lisa Mulvihill, and I've worked for the school board for about 17 years, and I support elementary through high school, as well as our ACE programs, and support some training for new psychology staff.
Hello, my name is Anna Polotska. I'm also part of the team at WRDSB, and I support elementary, middle schools, and high schools, mostly in the downtown Kitchener area of our service area. And welcome everyone to our recorded webinar, and I'll pass on to Katie.
Okay, so today we are going to talk about some aspects of anxiety. Obviously, anxiety is a very broad topic, and so we won't be able to cover everything in the time that we have today. But these are the parts that we thought would be most helpful to touch on. So we're going to start with understanding anxiety from a neurological perspective, why our brains work the way they do, and why anxiety is not all bad. This is really helpful for us to understand as the adults in the situation, but also something that you may find useful as a tool for explaining to your kids. We'll also talk about the principle of validation, how to do it effectively. We'll also cover the developmental need for co-regulation. You might be familiar with the concept of self-regulation, which is an important skill, but one that develops with age as the brain matures. And sometimes we overemphasize self-regulation at the expense of co-regulation, which is where an adult helps and directly models and directly assists the child when they're distressed. We're going to talk more about that. And lastly, throughout the presentation, and again at the end, we're going to cover some more specific and practical strategies that you can put into your toolbox. Some that you might be familiar with, but maybe new variations might be helpful to you. And overall, we're really hoping that you walk away from this webinar with some really great practical tools and strategies for supporting your kids. So Lisa is going to lead us through a first strategy example.
Throughout the presentation, we do want to introduce you to a few tools and strategies to assist with emotion management. So this first tool, we're going to teach our kids to feel the difference between tense and relaxed muscles. So at times we can feel so tensed when we're worried that we may not even realize what being relaxed feels like. So through practice, we can learn to distinguish between the first feelings of tension and then also the completely relaxed muscles. You can then begin to cue this relaxed state at the first sign of muscle tension that comes from anxiety. So by tensing and releasing our muscles, we not only learn what relaxation feels like, but also we can start to recognize when we are getting tense from worry. So a quick and easy way to practice muscle relaxation is with your hands. This is called rocks and socks. So first, we ask our kids to squeeze their hands into big fists as tight as we can. Squeeze, 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 squeezing all those big emotions into your fists or into your rocks. And you want to squeeze really tight and feel all that tension building up. Next, we say socks. And we rest and relax our hands, shake up all that tension out, and we find our socks. So we squeeze tight like rocks and then socks. So next time we're feeling strong emotions, we can just say the words rocks and socks and begin to feel the difference between tension and relaxation. And so our goal is to notice our tense muscles and then find our state of relaxation. Okay.
Thanks, Lisa. That was great. So we're going to watch a video now that comes from the Anxiety Canada website, which is a really helpful resource. And that link will be in the tip sheet that we mentioned earlier. So Jacob is a composite character, but he gives us a first-person perspective of what it's like to experience anxiety as a child. It's about 1.5 minutes long. And as you're watching, try to look out for things that you've seen in your own children, significant symptoms that stick out to you about Jacob's experience.
So, my name is Jacob. My mom calls me a worrywart, and I guess it's true. I mean, I do worry. A lot. About everything. Mostly I get stressed out about screwing up at school. Whenever I have a test, I'm sure I'm going to fail. The worst is when I have to do a presentation. I can't sleep the night before because I'm so freaked out that I'll mess up and get a bad grade. And if I don't keep my grades up, there's no way I'll get into a good university. And I always have this feeling that something bad is going to happen to me, or my mom or dad. Like, we'll be in a car accident, or there'll be an earthquake. Lately, I've been worried about someone breaking into our house when we're sleeping. I can't even watch the news because I worry that whatever scary thing I see on TV is going to happen to me. It's like it gets glued to my brain, and I worry about it for days. I hate worrying this much. I never feel like I can relax and just, I don't know, enjoy things. It sucks. My mom took me to see a psychologist. He says I have generalized anxiety disorder, and he's trying to help me stop worrying so much.
Okay, so maybe as you watch that video, you could think about some of the things that really stood out to you and the main things that Jacob is really struggling with. Hopefully you noticed that he was describing a lot of different things, primarily worry that comes from worrying about the future, worrying about bad things happening to him or his family. And he talks about this constant state of worry that's with him all the time. It's really pervasive, and it's something he uses the phrase, it's glued to my brain. I can't seem to get those thoughts unstuck. And so he's really describing a situation where he's worried about a lot of different things, and he's also worried a lot of the time. And he describes that he has received a diagnosis of something called generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD. And that really reflects, that particular diagnosis reflects that pervasive worry that's with him all the time in many different contexts and is really affecting him. It's affecting his sleep. It's affecting his enjoyment. He says, I can't enjoy things and it really sucks. That is only one of the possible diagnoses under the umbrella of anxiety disorders. And it's also important to remember that kids can present with these symptoms regardless of whether they have a formal diagnosis or not, whether it's either crossed that threshold to require that formal diagnosis, or maybe they haven't been able to access that diagnosis for some reason. But it's important to know that those symptoms can be there on a spectrum. All right, so now we're going to talk about the neurological basis of anxiety. This is a really helpful way to understand the feelings we have of worry and anxiety, as I mentioned before, and it can be really helpful knowledge for kids to have too. It's obviously simplifying things somewhat, but let's imagine that the brain has two parts, a cognitive or a thinking part and an emotional or a feeling part. Both of these parts depend on a network of interconnected structures, but we know that certain structures are very important. So for the cognitive part, the key structure is really those frontal lobes, the parts of the cortex or the surface of the brain that are right at the front, behind our eyes and our forehead. This part of the brain evolved last, evolutionarily speaking, and it's most developed in humans. It's what makes us different from all other species. It's the part of our brain that allows us to reason, plan, inhibit, and exert control over our emotions, and even to be aware of the need to do those things. All of these so-called executive functions, which is maybe a term that you've heard before. And the frontal lobes, we think of them as the CEO of the brain. The emotional system is housed much deeper in the brain, right in the middle. And we refer to the structures in this area as the limbic system. And one key structure within that limbic system that you might have heard of before is called the amygdala. It's a very small structure, about the size and shape of an almond. We have one on either side, left and right. And the name amygdala is derived from the Greek word for almond. And the limbic system developed much earlier in our evolutionary history, and the emotional behaviors that it governs are shared with many other species. Another way to visualize these two systems is using Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain. Again, maybe a model that you've seen before. For this model, we add in one additional part, and that's the very bottom of the brain, which contains the top of our spinal cord and our brainstem. And we represent these with the wrist and the bottom of the hand. And that's where the most basic functions of our brain live, including the ones that we don't have to exert any conscious control over. They're just totally automatic, like breathing, heart beating, sleep and wake cycle, as well as clusters of neurons that are responsible for survival responses to danger. And we talk about those responses as fight, flight, or freeze. And we're going to come back to these in the next slide. The thumb represents the limbic structures in the middle of the brain, including the amygdala that we've just talked about, especially important for those emotions of fear and anger. And then the fingers represent the cortex, which wraps over top of the outer surface of the brain with the prefrontal cortex at the front, the tips of our fingers. And we can think about signals flowing upward as well as downward in this system. So we can think of the experience of anxiety as the result of interplay between these two systems. The prefrontal cortex is usually the system that's in control, sending signals downward to dampen that emotional system. But if the emotional system detects a threat, it can also send signals upward, pushing back against that top-down control. Then our limbic system is in control, and it will send signals down the brainstem to trigger those fight, flight, or freeze responses. And in the hand model, we sometimes call this flipping the lid, because the thinking part of the brain is essentially offline. From an evolutionary point of view, this is very adaptive. If our ancestors had spent a lot of time thinking about whether or not they should run and how to do that, if they were running away from a predator, they would have been dead. And as Lisa will discuss in more detail later, we don't want to totally get rid of anxiety, because sometimes we need it to be prepared or activated for important tasks, or if we really are in danger. The problem arises when sometimes this system is active when it shouldn't be, or it becomes activated by the wrong things. These images are, This image and text is taken from a book that you might find helpful. It's called Hey Warrior, and it's written by Karen Young. In the book, the author describes the amygdala as your own personal warrior. And she says, your amygdala switches on when it thinks there might be danger. It's kind of like your own fierce warrior, always there to protect you. If it senses trouble, it fuels your body so you can be strong, fast, and powerful, kind of like a superhero. But sometimes there can be a teeny tiny problem. The amygdala doesn't check anything out. It's a doer, not a thinker. All action and not a lot of thought. So sometimes it thinks there's danger when there really is no danger at all. And I found this book to be a really helpful resource with younger kids. And it gives some kid-friendly language to this neurological basis of anxiety, why it's not all bad, what it feels like in your body, and how to calm it down. So what happens to our body when this fight, flight, or freeze response is activated and we're being fueled for being strong, fast, and powerful? This slide just kind of summarizes those physiological responses from the top of the body down to the bottom. So starting at the top, in your head area, you might have a headache, feel tightness in your brow or your eyes. Your face might be flushed and hot. You might feel like you're tension in your jaw and your teeth. Your lips might be tight. Stiffness in your shoulders. Your breathing might be shallow and fast, and it might feel tight. You might feel like your heart's pounding. In your stomach area, you might feel like your stomach is upset and it's burning or cramping. You get cold in your extremities and sweaty. It might be shaky in your extremities, and you might feel like you have to go to the bathroom a lot. And all of this in our body does feel actually pretty awful. And when we're experiencing it for a prolonged period of time, as this poor zebra here is losing his stripes, and he's saying, I think it's stress. So just to finish this part up, I just want to think a little bit about what these responses can look like in everyday life, because we or our children are experiencing these feelings in their body, but then what does it look like in terms of behavior? And I think that, Angela, you had an example that you wanted to share, can help share with us here.
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Katie. I just wanted to share that my daughter definitely does the fight, flight, or freeze. When she was younger, she used to specifically freeze in social situations. So she would oftentimes go really stiff. She'd have a bit of a blank stare or look like she was kind of zoned out. And oftentimes wouldn't really engage with us if she was under, a real stress. She would just freeze. As she got older, we do see a little bit more of the fight or flight. And at times, if we push the issue, say for an example, for homework or something like that, we can sometimes see, her acting out if we're not responsive to her needs, or we're pushing her when she's already anxious or under stress. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. That helps us to really have a lens as to what this looks like in real life, and maybe you can also think of some examples of what that looks like in your own kids. But just having a behavioral lens on that behavior when you're seeing it, and maybe realizing the physiological underpinnings of that behavior and what might be going on in the child's brain. So it might look like intentional disobedient, or behavior of avoiding, of checking out and not engaging. It may look volitional. It may look like the child won't do these things, but really it may very well be a situation where they actually can't. And we do, it can be really helpful for us as the adults in that situation to try to have that appropriate understanding of what's going on physiologically and neurologically for those kids, and maybe overcome some of those negative feelings that we might be having in the situation about what those behaviors look like. Okay, so takeaways for this section. We're just gonna remember that for our purposes, the brain has these two systems, the emotional system, the cognitive system, that the emotional system can sometimes overwhelm that cognitive brain, flip the lid, and activate the fight, flight, or freeze response in the body, and that experience subjectively of anxiety. We need to remember that kids can also experience and show their emotions through their bodies. So those tummy aches and those headaches that they might be reporting that don't have a medical cause can actually be from overactivation of this fight, flight, or freeze response, and are something that we should pay attention to and not disregard. and that there are strategies to help to calm this response system down, that there are things we can do. So even though it's helpful for us to understand neurologically what is happening, it doesn't mean we're just at the mercy of that system all the time. Our kids can learn how to control that system through different strategies. And so that's important that they know that too. Okay. Sorry, turn it over to Lisa.
We want to introduce you to a full body mindfulness activity. So mindfulness, we'll talk more on the next slides, but mindfulness activities are really meant to build a safe environment and a sense of calm. So rather than focusing on our worries about what happened yesterday or anticipating what might be coming next, we really try to strive to be in the moment, to stay in the moment with a calm mind and body. So an easy way for kids to get started with mindfulness is through body poses. These creative body poses can help kids feel strong and brave and happy and ready to tackle the upcoming stressful event. So we ask our kids, what does strong look like? What does powerful look like? What does confidence actually look like? And often we say that when someone has their chest puffed out and their shoulders are back and the chin is held high, they look strong or they look pretty brave. So ask your child to imagine their superhero. So some kids that I've talked to already, they've said their superhero might be Superman, Wonder Woman, or Moana. Some mention firefighters or Terry Fox. And some even have told me that their grandparents are their superheroes because even though their grandma's 92 years old, she's still out there mowing her lawn. So sometimes our superheroes can be people in our family, and the kids look up to them because they feel they're strong and powerful. So we want to ask our kids to practice our superhero pose. So ask your child to stand up tall and be a superhero, and to be brave as they approach a stressful situation, such as going in to write a quiz or going to do a class presentation. So just taking a couple minutes before their stressful event, find a quiet spot, take a bathroom break or take a hallway walk and find the superhero pose. And a powerful pose can actually increase your confidence and maybe even reduce your stress. So how you act may have an impact on how you're feeling and how you're thinking. Sometimes you have to fake it until you make it. So you can act confident until you feel confident. So finding your superhero pose, you're standing up tall with your shoulders back and your chest puffed out and your chin up high. Find your superhero pose and hold that for a few minutes, and that can help you feel a little bit more confident about what's to come next. The next slide is just an example of this. So the next slide is a video about two doctors ready to start their neurosurgery. So a very stressful event. So we just ask that you watch the video and look to see how they are preparing for this really stressful event.
Okay, I have everything set up. You will have all of your films, your favorite scrub nurse. What is happening?
I'm being a superhero.
Okay.
There's a scientific study that shows that if you stand like this in superhero pose for just 5 minutes before a job interview or a big presentation or a really hard task, you will not only feel more confident, you will perform measurably better.
Seriously?
Seriously. You feel it?
We're superheroes.
We are superheroes. Hold up your head and enter the arena and face the enemy.
This is a video clip from Grey's Anatomy. You can find this video clip on YouTube. So you can see then Amelia preparing for neurosurgery. She's doing a number of different things. She's breathing deeply, breathing really deeply. She's shaking out her muscles, so shaking out the tension in her muscles. She's visualizing superhero, and then she's engaging in superhero body pose. So she's finding her strong, brave, and confident superhero and imagining that for a few minutes and getting her assistant to help as well and working together to build that feeling of confidence as they enter surgery. It can be very powerful. So we can practice this with our kids, is finding their superhero pose to help them build their confidence.
Thanks, Lisa. That's a great clip to use with kids. I'm just going to take you through a quick refresh on what we're going to cover next. So I'm going to cover Validation. Then Anna's going to move on to co-regulation, and Lisa's going to continue to build our great toolbox. As I go through validation, I want to give credit where credit's due, and a lot of this information is due to the work of Adele LaFrance and her colleagues. And throughout this section, there's some great links that you can look at when you have time, and for additional information about validation. The first one here is actually about validation and working with anger, which we thought was also important because, as you well know, anxiety can look a lot like anger sometimes. And a note about anxiety, behavior, anger, and how it's displayed. There's a great chapter in a book called The Keys to Parenting Your Anxious Child that talks about anxiety and behavior. And that anxiety is not an excuse for unsafe, harmful, destructive behavior, but that we need to build this toolbox to manage the anxiety. So if your child does tantrum, throws things, or breaks things, that building the toolbox for anxiety is exceedingly important, but also making reparations for those sorts of things so that we're not excusing the behavior, but we're managing and helping with the anxiety. So if you do know that your child right now is building their toolbox with you, but right now might throw things or break things, take a look around your house and put away things that are precious to you for now until those skills are developed and you can feel like they can be out again. So let's take a deep breath and regulate ourselves for this new learning and see if there are some tools in here that would be useful for you to give a try. Okay, so I want you can think of an example, or I also will give you an example, but if you want to use an example from your own children, think of an example of something that makes your child anxious. What's the situation? What's happening? How hard is it for you to see your child in that amount of distress? Or how annoying is it in that moment when you're trying to get to work and your son or daughter won't get dressed, won't eat anything, won't come out to the car to go to school? So think about those examples. There's no judgment at all. We're all learning as parents. And if you want to use that example, that's great. If you'd prefer to have a little bit of space between that, between your child and another example, we can always use an example such as struggling with math. So you're sitting at the table trying to do homework. Your child is frustrated. You're frustrated. They're saying they're horrible at math, that they're stupid, and that sort of thing. You can use either one of those examples. So let's take a look at how sometimes things go in the next slide. So your child has said, I hate math, I'm stupid, I can't do this, I hate school, whatever is happening for them. Sometimes, oftentimes, our first inclination is, oh no, it'll be okay, you'll get it, it's all right. And you can see from this little guy in our picture, it's not fine. Even though we want to make it fine, sometimes we move too quickly. And this response, out of the goodness of our hearts, sometimes can be quite invalidating. So when you say it's fine and your child is saying it's not fine, it can actually evoke more strong feelings. So you think of a time as an adult when you're upset and someone says to you, oh, calm down, it's all right. How irritating that can feel in our bodies. If you think about that, it can be the same thing. But this is out of the goodness of our hearts because it's hard. It's hard to see our children in distress. And that same issue around the annoyance sometimes of it, when you're busy day and you want to get things going, or our kids come to us with something and we think, oh, really, is that a problem? But to try to join with them in that moment. Sometimes too, we give the message that, oh, this feeling's not okay, make it go away. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a minute. But reminding us that, as Katie said earlier, our feelings and emotions are crucial. In fact, anxiety and fear are crucial to our survival when something really is wrong. So how do we do this listening and validation? So the next slide talks about 2 B words, okay? Considering replacing but with because. Oftentimes, as I said, we'll say something like, I know it's stressful, but I know you're worried, but. And that but is the invalidating part. It kind of erases everything you've just said. So I know math is hard for you, but you'll figure it out. You can see how that kind of invalidates the experience and feels to the child, you're not listening to me. So when we stop for a moment and consider becauses, that's the validation part. So a really quick example, when my son came to me and he was stressed out, he had a terrible weekend, he was not himself, he was very concerned about a decision he needed to make. And I could see the distress in him. And right away, even though I was in the midst of developing this webinar, my first instinct was to try to make it better. I didn't like seeing my child in that amount of distress. So I actually started to say something that was a but, and I zipped my mouth. So it's okay if you mess up for a bit. And then I moved to a validation. And I said, I understand why this is stressful for you. Because, which we'll get into in a moment. I truly believe that if I would have stuck with, oh, it's okay, it'll work out fine, that would have stopped the conversation in its tracks. But what the validation was able to do is move us forward into a conversation. Without acknowledging the problem, there could be no support for the problem and no problem solving for the problem. And I really feel like he wouldn't have come to me again with it because I invalidated his experience. So trying to convince someone they're fine when they're not is not entirely helpful and can make the situation worse. Okay, so let's get into the becauses. In the next slide, you're going to see an elevator, okay? And this elevator is really important and really can help people kind of visualize what happens. So if you think about your child's intensity rising and falling like an elevator, if they're at the top floor, they're in no position to start reasoning and problem solving. It's sort of what Katie talked about too, flipping your lid, right? That thinking brain offline. So what validation is using 3 becauses to calm our nervous system, okay? Calm our brain. So there's a little script here, okay? I can understand or imagine why you'd feel the event or emotion because times 3. So let's take our math example and see how I did here with this sample validation. So you could say, I understand why you hate math and you're frustrated because it is a harder subject for you and because it seems easier for everyone else because you take twice as long to get anything done. So you can see how I've tried to slow down, I've tried to regulate myself, I've tried to match where the my child or your child is at. Adele LaFrance talks about emotions going up and down like an elevator, but the door to reason is on the ground floor. And there's an excellent little tip sheet for parents on the Mental Health Foundation website. It's called Tips and Tricks for Emotional Coaching. And you'll see some really good little notations and tips and tricks on that. So think about that elevator. If it's too high, they're not problem solving. They're not hearing you. You've got to get those becauses in and bring the elevator down. So in the next slide, we talk about what does validation communicate, or what do we hope it communicates? Validation says, I am understanding your experience right now in this moment. Again, you're not saying that they necessarily suck at math, but that you understand how they could feel that way. That it makes sense, to your child in that moment. Hall and Cook talk about defining validation as the recognition and acceptance that your child has feelings and thoughts that are true and real, regardless of the logic or whether it makes sense to anybody else. And really, even as adults, our logic can be flawed when we're stressed out, right? And this is a really important one to me. Emotions are okay. More than okay. They are necessary and vital to our existence. That cave person, like Katie talked about, would not have hung around if they didn't have some emotions to get up and run away from that tiger. And validation allows you to connect with that emotion and say, I understand, it's okay you feel that way, before you move on. And research suggests that acceptance and validation of a person's feelings, as well as naming that emotion, which Anna will talk about in a little bit, can help gain some control over their emotions so that they can calm down. It's sort of, I guess, a segue or a bridge to that being able to support and then problem solve. So instead of running away from that emotion, Adele LaFrance talks about leaning into it, lean into that emotion, but remembering it's hard. It's a hard thing to do. Okay, so let's talk about another example, maybe one that might be more appropriate or more in line with what we might hear from teenagers. I have to do a presentation. I'm the worst presenter in the world. I suck. And presentations are one of the most stressful things people can do. So remember, again, catch yourself. The first thing you might want to say is, oh, you remember how well you did last time? No, you're so smart. It's only 10 minutes. So take a minute, think for a second, and think about what a validation can be. So in the next slide, there's also a little tweak in the script that Adele LaFrance, that we offered earlier in the slides. And it's different wording, and that's okay. You can match the wording to your child and to teenagers. Jennifer McTaggart talks about avoiding I understand with teens, as they may not believe that you understand, right? So you could say, well, no wonder, of course you feel, because times 3, okay? And the great thing about this is it's not that it only works with children or adolescents. It can work with a huge wide range. Adults, we want to be validated too when we have an issue, and we want our friends or our partner or whoever to say, I get it. I understand where you're coming from. Okay, so I gave this one a shot too, from a teen kind of perspective. So you might say something like, no wonder you get worried about and hate presentations because they're harder for you. And every time you do a presentation, it makes you feel really gross inside. And because you see some other kids doing a presentation and it seems simple, easy peasy for them. So again, I'm trying to slow down because again, I might feel a little elevated because I'm also worried about what they're feeling. Take a deep breath, slow down, and mirror how they're feeling. It doesn't mean that you become really elevated and hysterical, but you're not going to say it in a happy tone. You're going to meet them and say, no wonder this is hard. And that's my wording. It may not be your wording. You have to be authentic. You have to say it in a way that suits you. It's a guide, and you can break it into parts. You can use different language for different kids' language abilities, but to be authentic and be there with them and make that connection. So the next slide is a list of things, which I've touched on a couple, that people sometimes feel really reluctant about this, and it makes sense. So some of these are brought forth by Adela Franz and her colleagues, and some of these have been brought forth when we've given the webinar in other places. So I just want to go through these to say, yes, this is hard, and to sort of walk through why it's hard, and are you guys sure we should try this? So the first one I think we've touched on. This might feel kind of uncomfortable at first because we're asking you to join in your child's pain, and it's hard. It's hard to see our kids in pain, and it's hard to join in with that. So again, that regulation piece for yourself, and then meet them where they're at. Again, as I mentioned before, we are conditioned to reassure. We want to make things better. And I think even in my training, many years ago, in some of the training I got, it was like, okay, well, we need to fix this. We need to move to problem solving, fix the thoughts. But I think that what I've learned over the years is that sitting with it at the beginning is crucial. And learning to tolerate a little bit of distress. Part of being human is to have emotions. Also, this comes up a fair bit. We don't want to actually make them feel like they stink at math or presentations or whatever. We're joining with them. We're meeting them where they're at. We're acknowledging that there's a problem. Now, again, without acknowledging that there's a problem, we can't get to a solution. Maybe they need more anxiety strategies. Maybe they are okay at math, but maybe we'll come to an understanding that there is a struggle with math, and maybe the problem solving is we need a little bit more help with math. And that's okay. Some people say, oh, won't this make it worse? We're going to open the floodgates. But again, it's meeting them where they're at, sitting with them so that then you can move on. Some people are worried they're going to open those floodgates to the emotion. But again, remember that young guy in one of the first videos where he's like, or first slides where he says, that's not fine. He needs you to hear him so then you can move on. A really excellent question came up in a webinar about can we guess? Can we ask the child where they're at? So sometimes we don't want to guess because we're afraid we're going to get it wrong, and for fear of making a mistake. They want to ask, you want to ask your child, well, how are you feeling? So there's a couple things around that. Sometimes we get nothing, the big response. How are you? What's wrong? Nothing. How are you feeling? I'm fine. And maybe they really don't know. Maybe their elevator is too high to let you know. Maybe they're completely overwhelmed. So as time goes on and we develop that emotional literacy, that vocabulary, and they can self-regulate and bring them down, maybe they will be able to. But as a start, the validation helps them to come to a place where they can bring the elevator down, and you're also naming the emotion. And I think, Angela, you had an example here about developing that emotional literacy or vocabulary. Can you share?
Yeah, absolutely. So when my daughter was young, we created a little ring, almost like a key ring, of emotion pictures. And she would have probably been maybe 6, 7 years old at that point, maybe a bit younger. And we had emotions that were probably the most common emotions, and we started there. And we would use those both to help identify when she was feeling happy, but also those emotions that might be what I would call those bigger emotions, like angry or sad or disappointed in something. And so we would use that actually as something that would help her identify the emotions. We had our own, she had her own, and so she could initiate use of it, and so could we if we felt like we needed to help her identify what was going on for her. And we found that as she's gotten older, she's actually become really articulate at being able to identify exactly how she feels and what those emotions are. Sometimes she comes up with words or to describe how she's feeling that are definitely not something that I've taught her, but she's just learned. And so I think the awareness from a young age about accepting that we all have emotions, and that sometimes those emotions are big, and it's really about what do we do with those emotions. So our little ring had some strategies on it as well, but certainly helping her identify those emotions, and then some potential ways of helping her feel better or self-soothe were really important for her. And so she has some a real slew of strategies now that she uses now that she's older. And I think being able to recognize, and as you know, adults and caregivers, to be able to recognize and reinforce that emotions are okay, and then it's what we do with those that's really important. Thanks.
Thanks, Angela. That's a wonderful example of, you know, moving our kids towards us helping them, and then them moving toward making that bridge towards them developing their own strategy and their own language. Someone also asked about, well, what if we get it wrong? What if we give an example that they hadn't even thought of? You know, we want to stick to what we know about our child, and hopefully we hit it that something they've thought about it or developmentally appropriate. We don't want to bring in adult language and adult concerns. But if you do hit on something they hadn't thought about, I think you just validate that yeah, this is stressful because now there's another reason. But I think it also normalizes their fear that other people have reasons why that might be scary. And kids will often correct you if you get it wrong. If you say, I understand you're mad. I'm not mad, I'm sad. Or I'm not mad, I'm whatever. And that's okay. I think Adela Franz talks about it as a validation whack-a-mole. So, you know, you just keep trying and hit it when you can. Some kids will like look at you and go, why are you talking to me like that? You've never done this before. This is super weird. And that's okay, because they're listening, they've heard you, and you're meeting them where they're at. And you can acknowledge that you know, you want to be there with them. You want to hear what they're saying, and that's what you're trying to do. And lastly, people say this feels really hard to me. I'm not used to this, and I want to fix it, and I'm a mama bear, and I want to have my kids feel good. Of course we all do. It is new. New things are often hard and a bit scary. Maybe you want to practice first with your spouse, a partner, a friend, and see how it goes. If you aren't ready, practice it, see how it goes, try other tools, and be okay with it not being perfect. I wrote down being perfect every time, but maybe not being quite perfect at all. That's okay. Practice it and see how it goes. It may not be a magic fix. You can use it in conjunction with the other tools from the toolbox that Lisa's going to further develop for us. But over the years, you know, I think during times of stress, it's a great skill to then again, that bridge, like Angela was talking about, to bridge that we're doing it for our kids, and then one day they're validating for themselves. Okay, so first, the validation. You can go into the next slide, Katie. First, the validation, then the emotional needs, the support, the comfort, a moment with a stuffy, a hug, I'm here to support you kind of thing, and then the practical stuff, the redirection, the problem solving. What do I need to do to get through this presentation or get my math work done? So Jacob, let's remind ourselves about our friend Jacob from the Anxiety BC site. He worries a lot. Those are his words. He's afraid of someone breaking into his house. If you take a minute and think about, how would you validate him? Resist that impulse to go right to problem solving and reassurance. But how would you think about validating Jacob? What language would you use? What phrase from the script would you use? What would you feel comfortable and authentic saying? And just an example could be, I understand why you'd be worried about someone breaking into the house, because you want your family and yourself to be safe. Because it makes it hard to go to sleep if you're thinking about that. Because it makes you feel vulnerable when you're sleeping to think about someone coming into the house. So you've met him where he's at. You've made your best guess about what his worries are. And then you can support and problem solve with him. So the takeaways from this section is that validation can be hard, can feel odd at first, but it can help label and helps kids feel understood, brings that anxiety level elevator down. We put in a little script for you. I understand, no wonder. The event emotion because times 3. And remember, the 3 becauses are important, but in the moment, if you can't think of 3 becauses, do the best you can. Then you can move on to the emotional support and problem solving. Give it a try and see how it works. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Lisa for another tool for our toolbox.
So this next tool is actually focusing on the importance of our breath. So we likely are all quite familiar with breathing exercises. And some kids may like some breathing exercises better than others. And it may take some trial and error to find some tools that are the right fit for your child. But the importance of deep breathing is that we can calm our bodies and clear our minds to help us for the task ahead. So the breathing strategies help us to bring our elevated emotions back down to the ground floor so that we're then ready to problem solve. So some of these tools, these breathing exercises, can be done quite quietly and discreetly. So if your child is getting ready to write a test or talk in front of the class, they can quietly take 5 under the desk. So for example, raising your hand and showing your child how to breathe deep in a very patterned, rhythmic way by tracing your fingers. And as you go up, you breathe in and then breathe out. And breathe in and breathe out. So the tracing helps to remind them that we're breathing in really big and then we're breathing out. So it helps us to remember we breathe a number of times and then we want to take pause and ask, how do we feel? Maybe we need to take another 5 and try on this hand too. So I really like this strategy because it can be done very quietly under the desk. And a lot of kids have told me that it really feels nice. It feels nice going up and down. And that's the reminder to breathe deeply. Okay, thank you.
And I would like to talk about co-regulation and how that can help you sort of understand how, as a caregiver, as a parent, you can support your child who is experiencing some strong emotions. Often, as parents of children who have strong emotional responses, and sometimes we're not even sure if that is anxiety or just very intense response to something else, we are told that our children do need to develop self-regulation skills. We're less commonly told that in order to develop self-regulation, we need to start with co-regulation. And Lisa, in her beautiful explanations about how validation works and how those examples could help someone who's experiencing anxiety, actually is demonstrating some of the options for co-regulating emotions by validating. Validation is one of the examples where you are co-regulating by being with your child and leaning into the emotions. This picture that I found as I was preparing for this webinar really spoke to me, and I think many people find that it reflects what co-regulation mean on that emotional level. So I'm going to read, this is a work by a young artist, Tara Shannon, and she allowed us to include this in a webinar. And she has a whole series that's called Rabbit and Bear, where a rabbit has quite strong emotions and bear's trying to and hoping to support the rabbit. I'm afraid, said Rabbit. What are you afraid of? Asked Bear. I don't know, replied Rabbit. I just am. Then I will sit with you until you're not afraid anymore, said Bear. We will face it together. And I think this is a beautiful metaphor for what core regulation is, for helping your child, and sometimes adult child, sometimes adult partner, in core regulating in the moment of intense emotions. You can focus on being with your child and supporting them in feeling that they're not alone in this intensity, because that feels quite uncomfortable. And in that moment, their thinking brain that Katie explained about is not really engaging. It's overwhelmed with the amygdala, the emotional brain. So in order for them to be able to regulate, they need help, and you are that helper. And Angela had shared a beautiful example of, I think many of us parents can relate to, in the shopping mall. If you want to speak to it, Ange, please jump in.
Sure, thanks, Anna. Yeah, so I share sometimes a story that I was in Shoppers one time and my daughter became anxious about a particular purchase. And she was at a place where she definitely was not able to self-regulate. And she had dropped to the floor and was quite upset, crying. Yeah, and I remember thinking, my initial response is like, get up, this is a little bit embarrassing. But I remember thinking at the moment, I knew that wasn't going to help. And so I love kind of where it talks about in this little picture here, where it says, then I'll sit with you until you're not afraid anymore. Because one of the things I did do right in the shopper's aisle was sit down with her and rub her back and try and help her kind of soothe her. And she has some self-soothing techniques that she uses as well. And so until she was able to use some of those herself, I just kind of like rubbed her back and tried to, just be with her. Sometimes that particular situation actually went okay. Sometimes it doesn't go well. I have definitely been in situations where I remember a time when we were in the grocery store and we had had a situation and we were down on the floor once again, and there was a lineup of carts that were just waiting, people trying to get down the aisle. And I remember feeling really embarrassed, and I know as parents and caregivers, we feel that pressure to try and resolve a situation like that. And so there are times when, we get it right and we take the time and slow down. And then there are other times when we don't get it right. And definitely as caregivers, we've experienced both of those. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Angela. And I think your example really brings us to the next slide, and the idea that in order to be able to help our child, we need to be in the right mindset. And the problem, sort of the neurological problem with that, is that we respond to our children's emotions, and they respond to our emotional states as well. So in order for us to be able to help them, we need to understand what happens with us. And the biological basis for this is what has been recently discovered as mirror neurons. There are neurons in our brains that actually fire when we are watching other people perform an action. And that can be any type of action, and that can be emotional response of others. And some people are more sensitive to emotional states of other people. And we know that many children and adults with anxiety actually are more sensitive to those elevated states of other people. So they sense when there is that anxiety in the room and they get heightened. And then the temperature in the room rises. So what Lisa was talking about with the elevator, it's not just one person's elevator. It's kind of like all the elevators in the room are going up. And those mirror neurons all are firing. So it becomes quite difficult to bring any of those elevators down and calm the amygdala of all the people in the room. And someone needs to start it, right? Someone needs to start the process. So sometimes it kind of helps to then have that image of a mirror neuron in your mind, and kind of like, oh, this is what's happening. I'm picking up from what's going on around me. I'm picking up from my child. I might be mirroring what they're experiencing. So what do I need to do first for my emotional state to go a little bit down in my temperature, my elevation. And then what do I do to do this? And this really is about kind of self-learning and self-discovery. What works for me? Any of the tools we are offering here today are quite universal in terms of you can try and see what works for you, and you can build your own toolbox before you introduce it to your child and try it together with your child and find out what works for you. Is it just a pause? And sometimes that works, right? Maybe that image of a mirror neuron, maybe the image of the rabbit and the bear, or use the hand that Lisa spoke about. Maybe as simple as famous count to 10. But you need to kind of pause and help yourself to bring the elevator of your mood down to the place where you're able to help your child. Some people are really great with self-talk, and we'll talk about this a little bit in this section, but really it is about finding what's the best tip, the tool that will help you regulate your own emotional state first. And we can go to the next slide. And this is another metaphor, quite famous one, actually stolen from the air companies. Most of us haven't flown for a long time as we are in the pandemic. And yet I'm sure for those of us who've been on the plane, you remember this picture, right? And it reinforces the notion that you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you're able to help the person next to you, be that your child or someone else you're trying to help. And this is exactly the same for building your child's ability to regulate. You have to regulate your own state first in order to be able to help them to use the toolbox you are introducing to them. And Angela's examples are really helpful in that. You shared many parts where you do things together with your daughter, right? Going through strategies or hugging on the floor, whatever it takes, being there and being in the state where you're able to yourself to apply the toolbox and problem solve, right? One component to remember, and some people are better with controlling it than others, I'm definitely not the best at this part, is controlling your voice. I know when I'm nervous, my voice goes kind of into high-pitched place, so this is not my super strength, for sure not. But it's a good reminder that if you're able to use a calmer, kind of lower tone voice, it will help your child's mirror neurons to pick it up and be like, oh, it's not a big thing going on. Things are okay. Things are safe. I can be in a less heightened state. Gestures and posture also communicate to others in the room, to your child, whether you're heightened and tense, or if you're in that kind of rocks and socks. Remember in the beginning of our presentation, if you're able to bring your posture to a more relaxed state, it will start that core regulation process. Another thing that it resonates with what Lisa was talking about validation is a concept that was introduced by Dan Siegel, and he coined the term name it to tame it. If you're able to name the emotion, whether you name it correctly or you missed it a little bit, like Lisa was saying, you're still giving it a name, and by that, you are engaging a thinking brain rather than just driving on the emotional wave and going kind of underwater. By bringing some language that is at your child's level and helps to identify the emotion, you are helping in that core regulation process. And I think, Angela, you spoke about that, right, in terms of the strategies and in terms of naming and adding those labels to emotional states. And your daughter learned that beautifully, right? But the initial state was, like you said, we did it together. We offered the language. We used that in conversation. And that's exactly how the skill of self-regulation builds through development. First is, like many other skills, like math and reading, most kids don't learn it on their own. We do it together with them and we guide them through the process. And once they build the skill, they can do it on their own. remember with strategies, whether you're first using it for yourself or you're sharing it and developing your toolbox together with your child, try to engage both your body and your mind. Most of the examples we offer today in terms of the toolbox, we have tried to put in together the toolbox that engages both the physical state, and that will help to physically calm the body, as well as the mind, offering some self-talk, validation, the naming. If you're doing those components together, you are more likely to do it more effectively and kind of get to a calmer state faster and be less frightened by the anxiety state. And we can go to the next slide. So we talked about the emotions, and it's known that emotions do not sort of live in our head independent of the thoughts. For many children, especially older children, when they're experiencing anxiety and heightened emotions, it is also linked to some thoughts, and quite often some negative thoughts. And those thoughts, as well as the strong emotions that the child is feeling, are reflected in the behaviors. You can help your child not just by kind of naming the emotions and validating the feeling. You can also help them by identifying the thought, as well as kind of looking at those thinking patterns together. So you can say it exactly like that. You can say, hey, this seems like an interesting thought you were having, if the child is sharing some of the thoughts with you, and let's look at it together. What do you think it's telling you? You can try renaming the thought if it's something like really negative, and you can sort of try to transform it to a less negative way of looking at things. The one thing that came up in our recent webinar was the term that psychologists also use quite often is catastrophizing. So you can say, I always fail on exams. Nobody likes me. So those kind of all or nothing thinking and big kind of dramatic thoughts are likely the ones that are hints that your child is experiencing worry and anxiety about the situation. And you can even just look at that one word as always or nobody and say, really, nobody? Maybe somebody. Maybe not always, maybe sometimes. So you can kind of look at that one word and say, can we maybe change it to not always, to sometimes? And when you do this, still, even though you're helping your child, encourage them to be in charge, encourage them to be in control of their thinking. And in the next slide, we wanted to bring up the kind of concern that often comes up, that those thinking patterns can lead to avoidance behaviors, and that does happen quite often. And sometimes those avoidance behaviors are actually something that's healthy, right? Or something that keep people safe. So some level of anxiety is healthy, and this is what we really want our children and adults to know. We don't want to completely get rid of any kind of worries, because there is an optimal level depending on the situation. What's the level of worry that is still healthy, that still allows you to do things you like? So if you're really not worried at all about getting sick, little ones might not wear a hat, or they might not wash their hands, or they'll engage in some risky behaviors. If there is too much anxiety, then it will stop kids from, going outside or participating in activities, or with older ones, they might not go on a roller coaster ride if they're really worried and really scared of, they have a fear of height. However, if there is no anxiety, they might completely not be safe in, high places and climb roofs. So there is that optimal level, and that would really depend on the context and on the particular person. We know the same is true for tests and presentations. Like in Lisa's example, if someone is really not worried about giving a presentation, they'll forget to study for it. They won't prepare for it. If they're over worried, then they'll get into that fight and freeze state and won't be able to present at all. So we want to remind our children in terms of their thinking and their actions, that there is this optimal level, and we're just working together to bring it to the level where it is more optimal and allows them to do things they want to do. And especially with younger children, we use this red, green light metaphor, red being unhelpful thought and the thought that is stopping them from doing things, and the green thought being the thought that might still have a little bit of an anxiety, but it's not stopping the child from doing things and doesn't lead to avoidance. For example, with a test, a child might have a red thought of, I'll definitely fail it, I'm just not going to go to school. And that would be a red thought that leads to avoidance behavior. And you can help to reframe it and kind of help the child to make it switch to the green light. And well, maybe it's something like, I've studied for the test. I have prepared for it. I have done it before. Another example might be, I have done this before, or it could be, I have done other parts of the project, so even if I fail the test, I'm not going to fail the course, right? So some of those more balanced type of thinking that will shift the child from avoidance behavior to more problem solving, and shift it to more peak behavior anxiety. And we can go to the next slide. And here we have some examples, and there are as many as there are people in the world, really, in terms of how you can help your child to build the regulation skills through being with them, and by practicing your own self-care and building your own self-care tools. Share your favorite self-care activities with your kids. It is likely they will like it. If they don't like it, try something else, right? It is easier to do things together that you both enjoy. It does happen that sometimes there is a very limited number of activities that you both enjoy, but it's likely you'll be able to find a few. So if you both like walks are wonderful, because again, it shifts the attention to the nature outside, and it gets the body moving. It is rhythmic, so it will regulate the breath, and any kind of sports kind of do the same. It might bring the heart rate up, but it will be kind of in the response to sport rather than because of the anxiety. And you can also help the child to reframe those body sensations in terms of, oh, my heart is really racing. And you can say, well, yeah, because you're playing sports, right? So it helps them realize that not all the signs of anxiety are dangerous. There are some similar things that happen when you play sports. You can do Lego together if this is what you both enjoy. You can color together. Many kids love doing it together, not just by their own. Any kind of games, board games. Baking is something that's recently become quite popular, and that's calming also because it engages hands and you can do things, and you can be creative. You can do puzzles and many other things. Yoga, if you have practice that you do, those are wonderful. They're wonderful poses and ideas in yoga that you regulate the breath and you focus on the breath again, and you can share that with your child. And I think, Angela, you had some great examples too in terms of what you do in kind of a simple way, but really lovely.
Yeah, I'm happy to share those. So one of the things that we do is my daughter and I, we like to get our nails done. So if we're not going to, a spa, then I'll actually do her nails for her at times. And so one of the things that was really nice about that is it offers an opportunity to engage in kind of some contact. So like touch, I'll give her a bit of a hand massage, paint the nails, which is obviously a gentle activity, but it also builds connection, right, and relationship, which is really nice. So that's one of the things that we will do, and together. Another thing that we do sometimes is, and this is a little bit more around maybe a bit more the modeling piece, but there are times when her anxiety will be related to social situations. And so we'll sometimes do a bit of kind of role playing or modeling kind of what a conversation might look like, where she's anticipating a question or a situation that might be uncomfortable for her, that she's anxious about. And so we'll sometimes role play or talk through those scenarios to see if we can come up with what it would be most comfortable for her to say as a response to somebody, or how she might handle situations. And we've found that to be really helpful too, is kind of just talking through some of those things together, and what might some of those strategies be, or what might she actually say kind of word for word. And so even at times we'll even go through and role play out kind of a scenario, and that has been really helpful. Don't get me wrong, it doesn't always work. And there are definitely times when we don't want to engage in that kind of stuff, but as much as possible, we try to integrate those kinds of things in, just to build the connection, the relationship, and help equip her with as many strategies as we can.
Thank you. And thank you for kind of that honest, reflection that it doesn't always work. None of the things we shared today will always work. And we know that. And that's why it's nice to have different things in your toolbox, and you can try this. Well, okay, this is clearly not working. Let's try something else. Or sometimes it's simple, like, okay, none of it is working. Let's take a walk. We're not going to talk. We're just going to walk together. But I think that that mindset that I can be together with my child, even in the moments of very intense emotions, really help to just be family and enjoy things, right? And simple things like doing nails together and enjoying it, right? Like even if things are a little tough in the moment, or not little, tough or actually difficult, you have those things that bring you together and bring everyone back to being together, really. And just a couple of takeaways on the next slide. A reminder that you need to regulate your own emotions first. This is probably the most important in this section, and just generally, it's very hard to help someone if you're not in the right mindset. If you need a moment, take a moment, and if you need 3, take 3. But bring yourself to the state of mind where you can be of help to your child. Notice and name emotions. Guessing is fine. You can name your own emotions. Sometimes that helps too, in terms of the modeling that Angela was mentioning. Watch for red thoughts. Sometimes they really get in the way, and if the child is able to share those with you, you can use the role play, like Angela was saying. You can just say, oh, let's look at that thought together, and just work with it, right? Like those are thoughts. Those are not reality. Those are just thoughts. And sometimes that's also a good reminder. And just keep in mind, modeling is very powerful. You are the person in your child's life that is the most important, and they've modeled a lot of things from you. You can really help them by being with them and helping them in the moment. And Lisa, you can share one more tool with us.
Great. So when we talk about building toolbox strategies with our children to help them manage their big emotions, we want to remember to be with our kids and build the toolbox together. So it's important to align the tools with the child's interests and their personality and their skill set. And we want to lean on our relationship we have with our kids to build an effective toolbox based upon who they are. So it makes sense to fill the toolbox with a bunch of different strategies, because one day the strategies might work and another day it may not work. So it's nice to have a bunch of strategies ready to go so that we can pick the strategy that might work best for that situation. So just a really quick review, we have already covered a number of strategies. First one being understanding the hand model of the brain and how our brain works. And validation, how we can lean into the emotion. Once the elevator comes back down to the ground floor, then we can jump in to help problem solve. So first we validate with 3 becauses, and then we problem solve. Co-regulation, so by regulating your own emotional state, you are being a role model for your children. And we want to model calm, because emotions can be contagious. and the red thoughts and green thoughts. So kids can learn that they can be in charge of their thoughts and they can be in charge of their self-talk. So we can practice changing those red thoughts into helpful green thoughts. So the more we practice the strategies, the quicker they may become habit. So many kids will do their best with adult guidance, and they may do really well if the strategies are done with the family as part of the daily routine. So the more models for them to see doing these strategies, the easier it is for them to do. So it's important to practice these tools while you and your child are calm and your emotions are on the ground floor. And the more practice, the more likely these strategies will become automatic. So then they're more easily accessed when emotions are heightened. So the first part of the toolbox, we will start with mindfulness on the next slide. So mindfulness is training our minds to settle on one thing in the present moment without judgment. Mindfulness activities are meant to build a sense of calm. So rather than focusing on our worries about what happened yesterday or anticipating what's coming next tomorrow, we really strive to stay in the moment with a calm body and mind. So there's lots of fun mindfulness activities, and the Positive Psychology website here has a variety of them to choose from. And we can also find some more information about mindfulness on our psychology department's YouTube channel. So the next slide is actually an example of one of the videos that we have on our YouTube channel. The videos on the YouTube channel are very short. They're about 3 or 4 minutes each. So they're really nice, quick snapshots of different topics that might be helpful for you and your family. I wonder if we could have maybe 20, 30 seconds of this first video, just to give you a view of what you might expect.
Hello, I am Sol Pound, Psychological Services Consultant with the Waterloo Region District School Board. Today, I want to talk to you about mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness grew out of over 2,500 years of Buddhist practice. It is based on the understanding that pain plus non-acceptance of that pain equals suffering. Please see my other video on radical acceptance to hear more about this. Mindfulness was brought to North America over 40 years ago as an intervention for chronic pain. Since then, many mindfulness-based interventions have been developed.
This gives you a little idea of what to expect with the videos on the YouTube channel. Other video topics on the YouTube channel include normative anxiety, when to seek help, how to cope with anxiety, self-care for teens, self-compassion. So there's lots to choose from. So we encourage you to check out the Psychology Department's YouTube channel. The next slide gives an example of a calming strategy with mindfulness in mind. And we think about when our emotions get so overwhelming, a grounding technique can help us to focus in on the here and now. So we're trying to calm our racing thoughts, our panic, by observing things in our environment while engaging all 5 of our senses. So this is the 5 senses mindfulness strategy. So this helps you to help your brain to block out all of the noise around you, all of the things that are in your environment that might be heightening your worries. And so we want to focus in on our 5 senses and focus in on your surroundings and the here and now. So we encourage our kids to look at things around us and label 5 things that we can see with our eyes. Then we want to notice 4 things that we can touch with our fingers. So maybe the desk is really feeling cold, or we can feel the soft cushion on our chair. We ask to think about 3 things that we can hear. So can we hear the birds outside? Can we hear people talking in the hallway? And then 2 things that we can smell. Maybe we can smell somebody's perfume. And then what maybe can we taste in this moment? So maybe thinking about tasting the sandwich you had for lunch. So all the senses we're wanting to engage. so that we can bring ourselves into the present moment and block out the noise that might be elevating our emotions. A quick way to do this with younger children would perhaps ask them to turn on their spidey senses. So we ask our young kids to turn on our spidey senses, just like Spider-Man might use his sense of smell or sight, hearing, and taste and touch to keep tabs on the world around him. So the kids will pause, focus their attention on the present moment, opening up their awareness to the information that their senses bring in. The next strategies focus in on breathing. And we want to really understand the importance of our breath. We know that breathing deeply and breathing in a very rhythmic pattern helps to calm our body and our minds. And again, we're probably very familiar with lots of breathing exercises, and some kids may not be receptive at the beginning, but keep practicing. And there might be different ways to engage with breathing exercises. So it's good to have a variety of different breathing exercises to see what might fit for your child. This first one here is the triangle breathing. So we visualize the triangle, and it helps us to remember that we're breathing in for 3 seconds, then we're holding it, holding our breath, and then breathe out for 3 seconds. And we want to do that in a very patterned approach. We breathe in for 3 seconds, hold for 3 seconds, breathe out for 3 seconds, and keep going until you can feel the difference and starting to feel more calm. We have an example perhaps that Angela can share with some breathing exercises with her family.
Yeah, one of the things that we have done is, and we started this when my kids were young, but we would do what we call balloon breathing. And so at times we would actually lay on the bed, and we would put our hands over our stomach, and we would fill a balloon with air, kind of through imagining that our stomach is getting large and being filled up with kind of air, so that diaphragm breathing, and then exhaling that. And so we would just imagine a bit of a balloon as part of our breathing exercise.
Thank you for sharing that. The next slide shows us a couple of different breathing exercises. There's the figure 8 breathing exercise. So you trace along in an 8-figure fashion. There's flower and candle strategy, and then the cookie breathing strategy, which I really like. So we ask our kids to imagine some baking in the oven, and perhaps some chocolate chip cookies are baking in there. So we're just waiting for the cookies to be done. We open the oven door, we pull out the cookies, and we see the cookies and we smell them, and they smell so yummy good. We breathe in as we smell those cookies, but they're hot, so we have to blow on them. So we breathe in, and we breathe out. So that gives some imagery and imagination, some of the breathing exercises to help the kids feel comforted with those imaginings. The next slide gives us an example of, again, another YouTube video, and this is flower and candle breathing. We can maybe play 20 or 30 seconds of this video.
Hi, I'm Sarah Nowak, Psychological Services Consultant with the Waterloo Region District School Board, and I'm here with Ava today.
Hi.
To demonstrate a breathing technique and a calming technique for the young students in our board. Some students may already know this and use it in their classroom, and for others it may be new. So feel free to share this video with them, practice at home, and even adults can use it too. We're never too old to take a good deep breath every now and again, especially in times of increased stress. So while we're practicing, we're going to use some props just to help us visualize the deep breath in and the deep breath out. And the more we practice and the more we visualize it, the easier it becomes to use that tool when we need it. So Ava, can you grab our props?
Well, we can encourage you to check out the YouTube channel videos for the flower and candle breathing. There's also an example of the square breathing. And on the next slide, we won't start this video, but we want you to check it out for yourself. So square breathing is an example of deep breathing exercises for young kids. The next slide gives us some examples of teen strategies. So some of the older kids that might want something more mature for breathing exercises. So there's a smiling breath, there's belly breathing, and there's warrior pose as well. And these are found at the Kids Health website. And we encourage you to check out this website for a lot of different examples for the older kids in our families. So one example, the warrior pose, we really like that. And this is just to really encourage the yoga poses plus the breathing exercises, because the poses also to focus in on your breathing as well as the body poses. And together, it really builds a powerful tool. The next slide shows us about progressive muscle relaxation. So people with anxiety or with worry, sometimes you can feel so tense with your muscles that you don't even recognize what being relaxed feels like. So through practice, you learn to distinguish between the feelings of a tensed muscle and a completely relaxed muscle. So then you can begin to cue this relaxed state at the first sign of muscle tension. So by tensing and releasing, you learn not only what relaxation feels like, but also recognize when you are getting tense and tight. And there's a number of different examples from the Anxiety Canada website, as well as the Beck Institute. So we encourage you to check out those strategies. For example, there's the upper body squeeze, fuzzy cat stretching. There's the neck and shoulders where you're tensing, relaxing your neck and shoulders with turtle in the sun. And there's the legs and feet, engaging those muscles, like smushing your feet into the mud. So we can really have some fun with some of these techniques and get your whole body involved. The next one is a whole body muscle relaxation strategy. And this is thinking about yourself as either a robot or a rag doll. So we ask our kids to find their robot body. So we want to tense all of the muscles in our body so we can really feel what our tense muscles are like when they are stressed. So we ask our kids to find our robot body. So we're going to feel the tension in our necks and our shoulders and our arms and our fingers, and we're going to stretch out and be a really tight robot. And we feel that tension from our top of the head to the bottom of our toes, all of our muscles really tensed up tight. And we hold that, and we hold it until we find our ragdoll body and we shake it all out. And that's our relaxed state of body pose. So we want to practice this with our kids so that they feel what these muscles can be like when we're worried and tense. So we find our robot body and hold, and then release into our ragdoll body. So as soon as the kids start to feel strong emotions and their body's reacting with tense muscles, then cue them with finding your ragdoll body. So that's a whole body technique that can sometimes be fun with our kids. A video on the next slide shows a type of muscle relaxation as well. And this is from Go Noodle Flow, and it's called Melting and Frozen. So we often have those times when we freeze and we may feel so nervous that we can't even move and we can't even think straight. And that's part of the fight, flight, and freeze response. But with practice, we can take that frozen feeling and melt instead. So if we have time for maybe 20 or 30 seconds to see this video.
Melting, melting, melting. We all have those moments when we freeze. We can't move. We can't think. But with practice, we can get good at melting that frozen feeling. Let's freeze up and then melt. Stand up in a spot with a little space around you. Cross your arms and hold your shoulders with your hands. carefully tuck your chin down and in. Tighten as many muscles in your body as you can. Let your body be frozen, like an ice statue. Feet tight, legs tense, belly tight, shoulders up. Now, even make a frozen face. Close your eyes, your mouth, your jaw, tight. Feeling frozen? Really still? Now, little by little, begin to melt. Let your
That's an example of progressive muscle relaxation so that kids can really learn the difference between those tense muscles and those relaxed muscles. The takeaways from this section then is building their toolbox together with our children. So taking time and be with our children to learn different tools and strategies. So depending on their personality, their skill set, you'll build a toolbox that is as effective as possible for that particular child. So these tools are all similar in that they engage the mind-body connection, breathing, muscle relaxation, poses. So engaging the mind, body, imagination all together to help reduce those heightened emotions. The next few slides are actually just giving you some resources to take away and to continue to build the toolbox with additional resources here. The next slide is the Psychology Department YouTube channel and also the caregiver guide that you can find on the WRSDB website. And the caregiver guide is specifically to access school support for students with anxiety. In the guide, you will find different anxiety apps and online support. So these are some images for some different applications that we found quite useful to look at to help build the toolbox. Some have some fees attached, but others are free for downloading. The next slide is just making sure that we're crediting all of the contributors to our slideshow. And I want to just then leave it up to Angela to close out the webinar.
Thanks, Lisa. One of the things that came up as we've done this webinar is the question around how is it that I know when to seek some additional support or potentially even some professional services for my child's anxiety. So I just want to throw that question out and see if we can get a bit of feedback, because I suspect that as you're watching this, that might be a question that parents are having.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really important question for sure. So I think the guidance that we would give on that would be around how much interference are the symptoms of anxiety that you're seeing? How much are they interfering with daily life and quality of life? So are those symptoms something that you can manage and that you can see some improvement in with use of these strategies and be able to go on with your activities of daily life? Or are they really getting in the way of what your child needs to do, wants to do, and what you and your family need and want to do? And if that level of interference is really getting to that point where it's really impairing that functioning and really impairing that quality of life, that's when you want to be reaching out to seek some additional help. And we do have resources on the handout tip sheet that we mentioned that will hopefully lead you in the right direction as to how you could seek some of those additional help. And also importantly, if you are in a situation of crisis, an immediate crisis, where you need to go to get that immediate help. I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to add there.
I just wanted to say, I think educating yourself is a powerful tool, and just watching this webinar is a great first step, along with the tip sheet to get some strategies in your toolbox to help. So thanks very much for watching.
And I would add that if in doubt, ask for help. There is no shame in asking for help. If if you have access to professional help, either in the community, privately at school, reach out. There are many professionals who are happy to help and support and share the resources. So please reach out for whichever level of help you might find useful. I think that's always better to try and reach out and get resources. And you, by watching this webinar, hopefully you've got some additional support and resources. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for answering that question. I really appreciate it. I just want to say thank you for sticking with us and observing our webinar. We hope it's been helpful. I just want to redirect you to the resources that Lisa has already talked about on the board website, but you can catch that at WRDSB.ca and find those resources there. I also want to let you know that Parents for Children's Mental Health has resources and some services that are available to parents or caregivers of children that are struggling, and we can be found at www.pcmh.ca. Thank you very much.